welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings here in Mendham. Not really. Yeah, not myself, not where I should be. Anyway, but we all probably have that feeling a little bit, right? This isn't the right planet. This isn't the right place. It's all a bit off. It's probably why you're listening. Anyway, alright, so you get these comments from people and this stuff where they just sort of try to negate everything by this proposition that consciousness or whatever we're doing is somehow happening all over the universe, and that you can't even make a dent in it, and that it'll always grow back, and blah 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 blah. And I think it's just, there's no reasoning behind it. There's no logic. There's no evidence. There's no anything. And so I just figure every now and then you kind of have to do this perspective thing and understand what it is that you think is going on all over the universe isn't a good thing anyway. That what it's making is, machines, little monsters. And that's it. It doesn't make something else. It makes machines that consume and lay eggs and consume and lay eggs. It's Aliens, the movie. That's what the universe is making. It's not making things to sit around contemplating, drinking tea and contemplating the universe. It just isn't doing that. That's not the function, and it's an aberration from the function when things are doing what we're doing. We're aberrant. We're not what life is, okay? The definition of it, the whole broad spectrum of it, it's not even, a billionth of a piece. It's as irregular to a car, I guess, as dirt on the rug. I mean, we're so alien from the basic function, from what it is. So it doesn't go anywhere as an argument. Even if the universe is doing something, we can't do anything about it. Realistically, there's no physics that really provides any opportunity for that. And the fact is the universe is sort of demonstrating it based on the fact that it could be, who knows, an infinite amount of time, and nothing has controlled it, nothing has unplugged it, nothing, blah 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 blah. And again, it wouldn't have anything to do with the fundamental argument, which is the idea is to minimize the damage that life does, being alive, forcing things to live, how uncomfortable the Frankenstein monster is, that objective doesn't negate the possibility of maintaining intelligence, leaving some computers behind, or even some sentience behind, to attempt to unplug the universe. I'm not arguing against that. I'm arguing against any notion that our behavior is futile and that we can't do anything to take care of the problem that exists. And so this almost goes back to, it always reminds me anyway, little trigger pops in my head in the nesting argument, that this is all really just about an argument about people who understand that if you're going to do something, you do it right. And if you're going to lay the eggs, if you're going to make this life crap, or you're going to defend it, then defend doing it right. Don't defend doing it wrong. And wrong is forcing things to exist in horrible conditions so you can maintain your experiment. Wrong is if you had a laboratory somewhere and it was your responsibility, you've decided you're going to have 1 million little rats or rabbits or whatever that you're going to manipulate and torture for some purpose. You'd have an obligation to clean the cages and to take care of them and make sure that there wasn't any unnecessary harm taking place. You wouldn't be, only the most obnoxious, naysaying defender of their selfishness could sit there and make an argument that somehow they don't have any responsibility to take care of these animals they have created for this purpose. If it was their creation, their idea, their plan, their project. Yeah, it would take a complete asshole to think they have no responsibility to do it in any kind of least harmful manner. So I shouldn't have to almost argue with people that sick and broken that they would defend doing everything and anything sloppy if it provided them the least bit of convenience. I mean, obviously, those kind of person would be just so obnoxiously ignorant and stupid that it's almost you can't even have a conversation with somebody that fucking dumb. Oh, I'm sorry. That dumb. Don't need the F-bombs. So, the subject, evolution. Good, right? Good timing, Mr. Lizard. A little symbol of it. So the symbols are always a little bit off, though. It's like they use this tree of life thing, and it's such a lie in a sense because it implies that that each branch is only part of a few hundred branches. There's no big deal. It's all part of the system. And if you were really to draw the accurate tree of our existence, it's a bunch of trees. It's a tree growing on a tiny branch on a tree, and then another tree growing on that tiny branch, and another tree on that branch, and another tree on that branch. We're a preposterously, we're out on such a thin little tiny limb of the realistic outcomes. Okay, the realistic outcomes of what happens if you put water on a planet somewhere. People just have this idea that, oh, some wonderful thing is going to grow. It's not going to be mold or botulism or all the more realistic definitions of what you're going to accomplish. No, they think it's going to be a puppy, little happy puppy. It's going to just poof out of the water, and that's not the truth. It's not. It's just nonsense. So, if you're going to be realistic about saying, okay, I'm going to be a life defender, what are you defending? Understand what you're defending when you defend the existence of sentient organisms. You're defending a process that created them. You're defending, just an insane, frankly, amount of deformity and disfigurement, because that's actually what evolution thrives on, is creating mutations, and mutations are basically deformities. And a tiny limb on a tiny branch on a tiny 4 million trees away from the first tree of mutations are positive. So most of them are crippling disabilities. There's so many aspects to it. They're just so, overtly and excessively and gratuitously and monstrously negative. This whole plan. So, I've made the point in lots of ways. So I can point out that the ocean where we started, you can see that nothing came from there. That's doing anything anybody would applaud. I mean, there's a few little crabs and different little organisms doing little fancy stuff. They're manipulating little rocks and building little houses almost. But there's barely any sign of intelligence anywhere in the ocean, that's doing much. And so that would be what you would wish on another planet, is a bunch of little shrimp-like creatures, gathering little rocks and creating gigantic weapons so they can defend each other, defend themselves against each other, and they just spend all day doing that, just looking around for paranoid, when's the octopus coming to get me, or when the whatever's coming to get me. No. So, yeah. What are you wishing on the universe in the first place, and is your wish realistic? So, that takes us back, the step further. I mean, our evolution from the simpler forms is, to say the least, an unlikely path. Okay, it's not the path that 99.99999 line over it % of what the living things have been doing before we got here, so to speak. It's not what the system creates. Is, you know, joyful contemplation of fancy pictures, complex objects. you know, that's not what it's creating. It's creating organisms with big giant claws and that spew acid, that do some other kind of offensive thing, aggressive thing often, to preserve their existence. And that's what it's doing. I mean, that's the primary function, is, kill them before they kill you. Yeah, so, so that evolution in itself, I can go through all the, the one-time events, the neuron in the first place. And then once these animals got on land, what did they become? They became lizards, and they became lots of things that didn't go anywhere. That blueprint didn't go anywhere. It didn't work most of the time. It didn't create anything. And it's only a tiny little shred of the organisms that turned into, the branch that became birds and mammals, that spent some time using a brain to manipulate the environment. And it's a tiny little branch, it's so thin, such a small percentage of where the animals actually ended up, where most of the experiments ended. And there's so many of those branches that led to us. We're not some, you just throw the stuff in the bowl and out pops intelligent organism. There's just no there's no sensible likelihood that that's what would happen. The likelihood is that you'd end up with an ocean full of organisms, right? If it wasn't for the porpoises and the whales, what's the smartest thing in the ocean? A great white shark? It's not something to applaud, because any intelligence it has is devoted to singular purpose. It's not doing any kind of, let's sit around and contemplate the universe, contemplate some pretty colors. It's not doing any of that. It's just eking out an existence, and in the same kind of, parasitic manner, just, take whatever you can take out of the environment, to build some structure for your prodigy to do the next step, which is, just to advance the genetic code another day and another year and another decade, in some kind of, deformed, certainly we would think we were quite deformed if we were stuck in such a limited circumstance. Obliged to live without our intelligence, and obliged to, be paranoid and fearful and smelly and obnoxious. So, let's see, I don't really have a plan on how to discuss it, and this idea of perspective and gaining some, and how so many people just don't have any perspective. They don't have any awareness. There's no triggers around them. So I've said this before too, that was sort of the transition in life, is once you realize nature's this bloody, horrible thing, it's, you start having the image of the cripple, in your brain, and for me it was trees, because trees were this analogy to what life is, and I started seeing trees, with blood on them. I started seeing them, with my greater intelligence. I was able to augment the image of a tree and see it for what it is, which is this there's been a horrible event here, a chainsaw murderer kind of location. This isn't some beautiful, wonderful pageant that's taken place. And so you walk around and you see that. You're reminded because you have a symbol, because you have something that triggers the thoughts and the perspective. And so, yeah, that can be depressing. It can be, it's a boner killer, in some respects. But it's also clearly something where you have just as much control over, in terms of your psychology, recognizing that there's times to think and times not to think so hard, and so you can, get around it without being crippled by it. But it's sort of important when you're going to have these kind of, philosophical conversations, that you're seeing the tree for what it is, that you're seeing the subject for what it is, and what it is, every living thing is sentenced to death. You're going to execute it. You're going to convict it of a crime it didn't commit, essentially, and give it the chair, or something much worse than the chair. I mean, it's kind of ironic that the most heinous criminals, kind of get off easy, in the sense that they don't have to go through this crappy dying. We ought to just give them a disease, right? We ought to just say, well, you can't stay here as long as the rest of us, because you're going to be punished. And but certainly we should kill you, in the average kind of way. We shouldn't give you this spectacularly clean and efficient death. We ought to impose it on you in this slow and horrible manner like the rest of us get. I mean, it's sort of a laughable irony, that in a way the punishment is a reward, because you're, sparing the guilty. But people have such a, disproportionate attraction to time. Time is so precious that, it still works as a deterrent, because you're taking away some time, and people just think that time is going to be something great. They just are optimistic. I have some of it. It's hard not to be blighted by this trick of your brain to, keep you in the game, keep you motivated, keep you moving forward, keep making you think tomorrow's going to be better than it was, yesterday, and that you're going to somehow get somewhere. That there's something you're going to, whitewash the fence, or you're going to, build something or do something that needs doing, that really matters in some way, and that even going to matter to you. But that's part of the, that's psychology, so I guess that's a whole different subject of how our brain just keeps us playing. But just the point is that it's so powerful that, for most criminals probably, I mean, I'm sure some psycho killers actually figure out that, if the state kills them, it's no big deal, because they were probably going to head for that themselves anyway. They would probably want the dramatic ending, not some, slow, piece at a time death by cancer or something. That they would be seeing it differently anyway. So deterrence would always be tricky for some people anyway, because it's yeah, they might see the punishment as a reward. But I did always sort of think of that myself, just in terms of, once in a while you have some moment where you might contemplate crime and, punishment. And it always seemed kind of silly to me, the threat of death. Oh, yeah, that's very scary. I'm going to have to do that anyway. You're not scaring me by killing me, because I'm going to have to be killed anyway. So you're just saying you're going to do it at a special time. Okay, well, yeah, okay. If I don't have liberty and I don't have all these other things that'd be kind of nice to have, then I won't have much reason to live anyway, so you might as well. And I get over with quickly. So it was almost like there was I almost say there was times when I almost saw it as a reward, an incentive. Like, yeah, I'll go be a mass murderer because, frankly, it's a that's one way to get a decent death. You know, and that doesn't make much sense, but that's our culture. Um, we don't give innocent people that option of the quick and relatively painless death. Anyway, side subject really. So back to the foundational stuff. So the ocean isn't creating anything. Most of the lizard world didn't create anything. Somewhere in there's this bird mammal and the mammals. The bird and the mammals somehow have to be connected. So there's some brute there that they're both feeding off of. A stupid screensaver. Anyway, it isn't stupid actually, but whatever. So most of the living things aren't doing what we're doing in history, for sure, right? We know that. We know it's only this short period of time that these intelligent things showed up, and sure, they're going to dominate because it's a great tool, but it's a tool that's really hard. It's very unlikely to get you there, right? So you could almost argue that it wasn't much of an advantage our intelligence created, in the sense that we didn't capitalize on it for could be hundreds of thousands of years. We were smart enough to get to the moon, in the sense that if somebody gave us an education, we could have gone to the moon, but nobody gave us the education, so it takes time, even once you gain intelligence, to really do something with it, to acquire enough knowledge to be able to understand how to understand, or what understanding is. Gaining some knowledge that you're trying to understand the system you're part of, and understand what it's doing and how efficiently it's doing, and whether you can do something to make it do that better. Even what's worth doing, like going to the moon. In hindsight, you'd say, well, you probably knew what you were going to get out of it. You weren't going to find anything. Okay, they already kind of knew there's nothing to see here. It's just a bunch of, ground up bits of crud, dusty place, and there's nothing to see here. But you could just argue that obviously the effort to do it was a benefit. But it wasn't really like a Hoover Dam, right? You learn things making Hoover Dams too. And then at least you end up with something as a byproduct of it that's worth something. You built something that's actually useful, versus, building something that you can't use again. It's just all lost effort and expense. So I guess projects you should, intelligent people would figure out that, well, if you're going to spend money, you ought to spend money on things where you can do both things, where you learn something about how it works and you end up with something that's actually useful. That would be the better science. But that would take a level of intelligence to figure out that there's different ways to measure efficiency, and that you have to kind of do that carefully too. You have to do that. You have to evolve your intelligence to a point where you can understand, oh, these were mistakes. These weren't, good ideas. We did it less than well. And so I could argue that in the future, people are going to look back, just as we look back at people who owned slaves and say, how could they be that frickin' stupid? I mean, it's just so overtly evil. To own another person, to see a baby born and say, I own that. I mean, that's just evil. To not be able to appreciate that you wouldn't want somebody doing that to you. I mean, it's that simple. It's so bad, right? You wouldn't want the aliens to show up and herd you up and put you in chains and then ship you off and then enslave your children forever and blah, blah, blah. I mean, of course you wouldn't buy that deal. you'd say that's stupid and retarded. So, I mean, I'm just saying it's so obviously dumb. But it's just as obvious to the future. The fact that we don't have a right to die, that, that people really haven't thought about, any of these impositions and these torments. The whole vegetarian argument, that at least it wasn't made as an argument, that people would actually concede, well, yes, it would be better if I could derive my gratification without overtly tormenting organisms to do it. That doesn't seem like much of a concession to have to make to the facts. I mean, gee, was that so burdensome? You needed some sort of high intelligence to figure out it's not nice to harm other sentient organisms for your gratification. That if you have to make a pie, that it would be better that you don't shove, birds into it, or some other, some feeling thing into it. So that's another argument you can make towards evolution, is just look at so the plants invaded, the algae or whatever went to the land first, and but you can look at all the plant life on the entire surface of the earth. It's all life. It looks very lush. It looks, very active in doing its living thing. But it never created a nerve cell. It never created anything that could be made into anything called a brain, or even much of a... You could say some organisms have some nervous system, but it's all chemical. It's all moving kind of slow. The signals, like the Venus flytrap or something, they have at least some mechanism where they can do something that looks like animation. It's not much animation. I mean, it's just opening or closing a door. So it's not much of a brain, and not much of a, it's so minimal that it's almost not comparable. But that's what, 2 billion years of evolution got. Nothing, or whatever, 1.5, whatever the number would be. An awful lot of evolution and nothing to show for it. So I'm just saying that's the probable outcome of life existing in some other planet. The probable outcome isn't going to be mammals and big-brained organisms and all that crap. It's not going to be the probable outcome. Not by a long shot. Yeah. And so there's these arguments that this is, even getting to the point of creating this brain, something that can do some logic, and flip some switches and do some reflexive action. So then you start getting into single-celled organisms, where they have a bunch of different functions, built around a very simple structure. Well, it's not a simple structure because it has a bunch of complex structures in it. But they're basically organisms inside of organisms, in a sense. Like each structure is itself a little contained, thing. Just like your liver is not really you, it's just doing liver cell things. Very different than what the brain is doing. You seem to be the whole thing, but the whole thing really doesn't have anything to do with what's going on in your brain. But the point is all these little robots, these little machines, and that's all they really are. There's no expectation that they are synthesizing perception of the world, that they're doing anything but being triggered like the Venus flytrap. They have a little trigger, there's something steps on the trigger, and there's a reflexive response. There's no thought about it. There's no, what does it mean? There's nothing going on in terms of what we consider perception. So that's a whole nother subject. It's just the fact that even if you get a brain, the odds of your brain ever developing consciousness or the ability to feel or all of that stuff. I mean, how many billions of years could you wait if I just put the rudimentary paramecium on a slide in space on planets, and I just dumped one everywhere, would any of those ever um, grow into anything that has neurons and a central nervous system and all of that stuff? And there's no likelihood. They just keep growing into little different monsters that perpetuate a function which is really so simple. And so then you get into all the arguments about why it did happen to us, and what kind of isolation organisms need, or what kind of complex environment does having a brain actually give you some advantage in, and how much brain and how much does it cost to have one, and how much energy is it using, and how much you're getting back, which gets back to arguments about flight. And lots of birds have lost the ability to fly because it wasn't very efficient. They had to use an awful lot of energy to fly, and they weren't getting much out of it, and so they did better not flying and just walking around and chasing stuff down. There's one of those, like on the Galapagos Islands, there's an owl. It doesn't fly anywhere anymore. Just jumps like a cat. It pounces and it kills other birds. Which is really even more disgusting. All right, so I'm going to take a little break and see if I can find some new way to talk about it that could trigger or mean something to the belligerently unpersuadable. Yeah. I mean, the intelligence perspective is to understand the trilobite. That's what life is. Life is little monsters. Big mouths, teeth, weapons. That's what life creates. It doesn't do this. Let's all just sit around and talk about how marvelous the play was, the ballet. Yeah, no, it doesn't do that. And even if it were to, if we were really intelligent, would we applaud and say, gee, that's great? Or would we say, gee, what the hell are they applauding? What are they watching? What are they, enjoying? I mean, couldn't all of our ambitions and all of our tastes, all of our enjoyments be easily ridiculed? I mean, I do it with sports. I mean, sports is just so lame and it's such a bad soap opera, and it's so silly that people get just caught up and addicted to this redundantly stupid hero parade. It's just so bad. Ugh. Yuck. Yeah, back. So I had some time to think, and unfortunately, my brain wouldn't stay on the subject, of basically evolution, and the fact that it doesn't come up with this, what we call an ideal state for most of the living things. Any kind of ideal circumstance. That everything just lives on margins, pushing the survival envelope, and the system is always going to take some advantage. It'll find a weakness and exploit it, and then you're going to have to be deformed again into some new shape that will protect you from that weakness, once it's exploitable. Once something declares you chewable, you become a food source, then you're in big trouble, and you have to somehow create some aspect that makes you less desirable as a food choice. All of that kind of struggle for survival, which that moth sort of illustrates, in the fact that it had to change its function to deal with the man-made pollutants. And so it went from being that kind of moth to being a black moth. But anyway, yeah. So what my brain would think about was just intelligence and its evolution, and the word intelligence doesn't really mean anything. I mean, you can can have an intelligence test, and you could test somebody's capacity to retain vocabulary, definitions of words, and even memorize a few sentences and have a few concepts. And that's one way of measuring it. But it's not going to tell you whether they're, all they have is baseball statistics, and all they have is nonsense, Tesla quotes. Their use of the memory space, hasn't been optimized, and whatever logic they can do is just based on what they have as principles. These basic rules or laws, you might call them. That's what they call them in physics. And they'll give you some guidepost to understanding any kind of system. You can just use the same three-dimensional, idea, and have laws of conservation of momentum or something else, and that'll make it all, there'll be a certain logic because everything's confined by those rules. And unfortunately in philosophy there's no rules. There's there's no common law of philosophy in terms of being able to logically understand. And so I guess I would argue that there's a bunch of these facts that you sort of have to learn in life about, what's the context of your existence, the context of you being born in a certain country and a certain culture, and understanding what parts of that have any validity and what parts of it are just bullshit. What habits you formed have some sort of integrity, like picking stuff up the floor and putting in the garbage can, or what habits, like wearing socks. I don't know. They seem to have some function, but I just mean, we have all these habits that don't have anything to do with any real constructive outcome. They don't make us better people. They just make us perhaps even just irritating. Even the way we use language or use words and slang and all of this other stuff that ends up just degrading language. Sloppy, lazy, lots of things that we have as habits that aren't good, that aren't constructive to making us optimize, whatever you have as a brain. So everybody's raised in a culture full of crap, and so I was raised in a culture, full of crap. Leave It to Beaver, on TV, Green Acres, I don't know, good or bad shows. Whether they're watchable or not is not the point, but it's just the messaging, what it's teaching you in terms of formatting you or programming you. And that's the danger of it, is that we are programmed by all of those images into defining, what's pleasant and unpleasant, what's good music versus bad music. All of that stuff doesn't have some definable laws or rules. I mean, there might be some rules of symmetry, like all people could recognize that, images with symmetry in them, with balance, are more pleasing than images that are imbalanced. That kind of thing. Complementary colors, it might be a consistency to some sense of, what you can mix and what you can't. What's oily and watery, and what does mix and what doesn't mix. But there is no rules for the fundamental premises from which people build their understanding, what kind of Legos we're using to build our understanding of reality. There's just no consistency in any of those foundational blocks. So you have the religious kooks, and then you have the, fairy tale loving unicorn seekers, the silver lining folks, all the people that they have some law in their head that says somehow it's all right. It's this optimism bias. Lots of different. They're basically philosophical notions. They're basically statements of fact, and they don't have any good basis. They're not based in fact. There's no experiments or no factual history that defends any of it as anything but just a nonsense. It's like astrology or something. I mean, these are really bad concepts for people to have in their head as facts, as pieces of what life it means and what it means to be a thinker and what it means to finding the truth. They think these things have some truth value, and they don't have any truth value. So they corrupt their whole capacity to do logic because they keep interfering, in terms of getting they can't see the brick wall and the car driving right into it because they have all these fake notions of these fake hands and fake things that are going to somehow fix the problem. Oh, as soon as I said fake hands, that reminds me of the invisible hand, in the economic sense. And, that was always such a stupid notion, because the invisible hand of the idea that this system left to itself, that there are balancing mechanisms, we already had such proof that they aren't there, okay, that the William Randolph Hearst of the world will exist, and they will be the invisible hand. They'll be the hand that will dictate the future if nothing outside of the system stops them. I mean, in a way, the only thing that stopped William Randolph Hearst was the fact that he didn't have a prodigy, that he didn't have some legacy to give to somebody else to allow them to manipulate us forever. When other fortunes, you could go back 300 years ago or 400 years ago, and you had a whole bunch of people who were hoarding gold and doing all kinds of, those fortunes still exist, they just have different names. It's like the Kennedy fortune still exists, it just has a bunch of different names now, so it's hidden, but it's there, the Rockefellers, all of that. So the invisible hand, there's no theory that shows that it that works in every case. It only works in these narrow experiments. You do a narrow experiment, you can make the invisible hand work, as long as you don't allow this certain stuff to happen that changes the rules altogether. And but there's no, and so if people have some notion that it works and it doesn't work, then they think it's going to fix it. They think it's all going to be okay. The machine is going to somehow function because they have some, make-believe regulator besides us, besides what we create as regulators. So anyway, so you're sitting here with this. People can have such broadly different notions of what the foundations of existence are, what it's made out of, and that makes this conversation really difficult. But on a broader scale, I guess I'm just sort of making the argument, or will attempt to make the argument, that they should be able to know that they're probably wrong, that all of those notions will die, just like the dead religions, that you really do have to found your notions, your ideas, your basic perceptions on something you can demonstrate with evidence. And the evidence points to, as I stated, evolution as being the functioning mechanism, and that it doesn't have any regulators. There's no controls or obligations, and there's certainly no that's going to happen automatically kind of stuff. Well, I guess that's the wrong way to say it, because there are some things that happen automatically. Predator-prey would be an example. I mean, it's kind of interesting, the patterns that you do find in evolution, in the sense that the marsupials were separated from the mammals, but yet they created organisms that are almost this, that are very similar in their function and even in their appearance, even though they had a very separate evolution. They ended up creating a pattern of organism. Now, they didn't, you could argue they didn't create human beings, so it'd be interesting, egg-laying humans. But anyway, not too much in the monkey category, the simians. But anyway, where was I going with this? But it's like you can say the kangaroo and the jumping rat, very similar, but a long way from each other, evolutionary, two different evolutionary paths to get to a very similar function. Uh, yeah. Um, that's not exactly where I wanted to go with this. But so what's evolving is our understanding, and I guess you would say its coherency to reality. So that would be what we're attempting, is to be coherent to reality. And you can see some progress, over the last 10,000 years in terms of recognizing that diseases were caused by bacteria and viruses, and that, it wasn't punishment from God and all of this other crap. And, we've certainly done the everybody pray and see if something changes. See if we can grow a new arm on a guy by praying. We've certainly seen that experiment hasn't been conducted. We don't have any success stories. So apparently there's certain rules. The lottery numbers. The psychics and their capacity to win the lottery. We see it violates some sacred rule of the magic to do anything. God won't grow an arm. He'll cure your cancer in some magical way, but he won't grow a new arm or a new leg. He'll do things that we can't prove he did it, but he won't do any of the things that would prove he did it. So you can find all of those flaws in the logic and say, okay, these people are both being kind of belligerently stupid, when they start ignoring glaring evidence. But then I can also, like I said, I can say the smart people are doing the same thing in terms of I see it with physics and dark matter and silly inventions that are just obviously God of the gap, desperate answers to questions, have no real hope of being the right answer. And you're just, it's just kind of glaring. So here we are, we're trying to do this evolution to getting the truth, getting to the truth, and you can see definite progress, but then you can see pieces of regression, and where there's all these signs that there seems to be something inevitable in the way, something not inevitable, something persistent, and this might be this idea of use value, and the truth isn't very useful. It's not going to make you more aggressive. It's not going to make you more reckless. And these are the things that might get you rewarded in evolution. These are the things that we haven't created a structure where this evolution of ideology, where the best ideas are likely to be fed and matured, and instead we've created huge incentives to keep people stupid. Tax subsidies for religion, and the lowest common denominator of all of the institutions, which strive to offend no one and include everyone, so they can sell everyone something. They don't really care about the truth; they just care about selling a product. And even that is sort of a definition of a cultural mistake, in that anybody who isn't going to be persuaded by advertising isn't going to have any TV shows made for them, because the only way you finance the show is through fooling people into buying crap. So the only shows that are going to get financed are ones that are going to be watched by people, are tend to going to be more appealing. It's like on YouTube, making YouTube videos. It really depends on the subject you're talking about and what your audience is. So if you can get an audience full of women, that's the other thing you'll get rewarded for. Because apparently women are still stupid. Maybe it's just that women do most of the purchasing. They're in the store more often, and as just a fact, and therefore they're more vulnerable to the messages of the advertisers, and just having it in their head that, oh yeah, I saw that commercial for that, and maybe I'll buy that. Well, anyway, the point is that you might get, your range of how much you're going to get per video, whether it's, say, a penny or 8 cents. This is the range. It can be anywhere in there, per view or something, if I just create an arbitrary number. It's more like, well, it's more like in dollar cents. So for 1,000 views, you might get $8 if you're attracting women, older women, and you'll get $1.50 if you're attracting older men. So, one audience has value, the other audience has no value to the advertisers, and so that's part of what's feeding the culture is this bias towards sending only messages that will be received by people who are likely to buy a product, and those are the ones that will get financed, and they're financed very disproportionately. $1 versus $8. Huge difference in how much money will be thrown at something, based on what your expectations can be. And this is, sort of proven with movies too, like, Titanic, a very mediocre movie, but women, somehow, it just meant something to them. It's kind of funny, right? Because it's almost a pedophile kind of thing, and women aren't usually guilty of that. But it sort of put to rest a lot of these notions, about what people are, in terms of some of the lies about. Well, anyway, the social cliches, whatever the word I'm looking for. Just those notions about what motivates. And maybe it's just because they all wanted to be Leonardo DiCaprio's mother or something. Maybe that's all it's about. But anyway, so it's just the point being is that stuff gets way over rewarded because it triggers a demographic, and that's what's running the system, is those kind of triggers. And obviously it's the it's sort of everything's being engineered to satisfy a really dumb majority rather than to reward a smart minority, and that won't get you very good evolution. So there's no reason to have high hopes that when I did say something like, well, in the future they're going to know what a big dumbass you were, maybe the future will be dumber, and that's a scary prospect, because we have created mechanisms that just keep rewarding something harmless, simple, plastic kid toy kind of stuff, instead of the real weapons and the real truth. Hard facts. Keep everything soft and mushy. But anyway, that's a whole, all these subjects you could, write books. And that's sort of what I'm making the argument about evolution, is you have to think it's books worth, it's volumes and volumes and volumes worth of failed experiments that the tiny percentage of the successes are made out of. And that if you were to say that you wanted to have intelligent life in the universe, you have to just understand that if you're going to make it through evolution, you have to accept that you're going to create an awful lot of harm. You're going to create a lot of mutant and deformed children that you're going to brutally kill to have what you want, to get your creation. So anyway, so that would probably be enough. I guess just on the subject of this, there's this little bit of a word issue, anti-natalism versus effilism, and I'm not saying I'm very pro preventing humans from having kids, but I'm even more interested in preventing crocodiles from laying eggs. I'm more interested in stopping the engine that created us than stopping our creation. Now, it would be, in my opinion, a benefit if we let go of the whole game, but there's clearly a huge distinction between the intelligent game and the really stupid, hard, brutal robot game played by barely sentient organisms torturing each other. I mean, that game is a game that's obviously stupid. I mean, that's like watching deformed, retarded humans, bash each other over the head with bricks. I mean, anybody entertained by that would have to be psychotic and insane. And that's the form, that's the facts, of what's happening. But yeah, there's two arguments. I mean, the one argument is stop the machine, because you already have what you wanted out of this thing anyway, right? So even to those people, yes, you already have your intelligent organism. You can figure out how to, engineer a life without feeding off of a biosphere that is being tortured. So do that, and at the same time, keep recognizing that you're only running on your psychology. Your psychology is what's keeping you in this game. It's not your intelligence. Your intelligence isn't saying it's a good idea. Your psychology is telling you you need it, you want it. And once you recognize that, then you can also have a bit of immunity from any notions in your head that it would be some great tragedy if, the earth was made sterile, of both animals and humans. But anyway, I don't know if that clarified anything, but we'll see. I mean, there's nothing I can do with these people who think we're heading for something. That there's somewhere we're going, besides just redundantly, waking up and drinking your coffee and making your video and, no, you're not going anywhere. There's nothing else to do but these chores. And I don't know why anyone would think it'd be a great idea to sentence somebody to have a chore to perform. That seems like a work camp of some kind. It doesn't seem like you're giving anybody a present. Yeah. It's not a gift, that's for sure. It's not a gift I would expect to receive without some right to punch somebody in the face. But anyway, I just probably didn't say it the way I needed to say it to make it clear enough where people won't fuck it up. So just pretend I didn't say it. People should just fuck it up anyway. People are just so fucking dumb. But anyway, I'll give up and say that's enough of video. I guess I just have too many subjects in my brain at the moment, so I can't focus enough to be as articulate as would be useful. So you'll just have to take the kind of sloppy, soupy blurriness of it for what it is. Sorry. Look at the pictures and just ignore me. Or whatever. Okay, never mind. I will endeavor to do better. Okay, that's what I'll do. So, till the next time.